Welcome. My name is Shelley Gehring, and I am a part of the community assistance team here at MHP. And this is the last of our series. This one is focused on accessory dwelling units and the property tax exemption for affordable housing. So welcome. I have several colleagues joining me here today at MHP, several from the community assistance team, Renee, Christine, Lara, Katie, and other MHP staff as well. We are asking you to put your questions in the chat today, questions and comments, and we'll get to as many as we can. Some we may be brought forward to speakers, others they might answer in the chat. If you would like, you can turn on live captions for this series, for this session today. And for those of you who may not be quite as familiar with MHP, we just wanted to share a little bit about our organization. We focus on expanding access to affordable housing across the state, and we have four main outward-facing teams. We have our Center for Housing Data that collects, analyzes, and shares information to help inform.
So she mentioned this might happen.
Okay.
Her computer was updating, and she mentioned she might get kicked off. So
Thank you.
I think we just give her a minute.
Renee, I'm happy to jump into my portion of the presentation too, if after a minute she has a turn.
That actually would be great. So
let me know when that looks good to you, Renee.
I'm able to see your screen.
And is it on slide format, like slideshow?
Yes, it is.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And thank you to Shelley. I know she would have passed it off to me, and I'm sure she'll circle back with all that great information for you all. But welcome to my portion of the presentation. My name is Claire Morehouse. I am the Accessory Dwelling Unit Coordinator at EUHLC. And without further ado, we can jump right into my presentation. Just introduce myself. That's my contact information, which will also be at the end of the slide deck. So I'm going to have a brief presentation for you all today and then take some questions. I'm going to start out with reviewing some key highlights of the ADU law and regulations, and then I'll jump into some HLC, the FAQs, a list of FAQs we have on our website, as well as some additional resources. I'll jump into some really fun stuff, some new initiatives we have going on, and some progress to share out with you all on ADUs based on our data collection efforts, and then wrap up with some questions. So to start off, so prior to the passage of the Affordable Homes Act, as many of you may know, many municipalities across the state had their own ADU zoning bylaws in place. They had their own various restrictions, and as a whole, the state saw some units, but limited new units. So to really kickstart ADU development, as part of the Affordable Homes Act, ADUs are now by right under 900 square feet across the Commonwealth in all zoning districts that are defined as single-family zoning districts. And that definition is in the ADU regulations, and the ADU regulations also coin these ADUs as protected use ADUs because they are now protected by the statute. This law was signed on August 6, 2024 by the governor, and then it went into full effect when the regulations were published on February 2nd of this year. So part of the law and part of this idea of protected use ADUs is that ADUs were added to Section 3 of Chapter 48, the Massachusetts Zoning Act. And so this means that ADUs are now added to a list of protected uses under what we call the Dover Amendments. This is Section 3. And they're added to a list in addition to childcare facilities, educational facilities, religious uses such as churches. And the idea of the Dover Amendment is to protect uses that may have some challenges at the local level getting permitted, for example. And so now ADU regulations are a part of that list, and they're protected under Dover. Another important thing to note is that nothing in the law or the regulations supersede state health and safety law. So this means or any federal law. So this means that the ADU regulations don't supersede Title V, for example. We don't supersede the state building code, fire code, and don't supersede any federal law as well. Some other key things from the law and regulations. So each law in a single family zoning district, which is defined as a zoning district where single family homes are allowed either by right or by special permit, regardless of how this is named, is entitled to one protected use ADU per lot by right. And so this could mean, for example, a zoning district that is defined as a commercial district, however, single family is allowed by special permit. That would mean that protected use ADUs are by right in that zoning district. It also could mean an R2 district where single family is by right. So both of those are examples where protected use ADUs are now, and lots in those zoning districts are now entitled to one protected use ADU by right. We also define principal dwelling in the ADU regulations. So this includes any structure with a dwelling unit in a single family zoning district. It does not just mean a single family home. So this could be a duplex, a triple decker, a multifamily. As long as the structure has a dwelling unit, it's entitled to a protected use ADU if it's in a single family zoning district. And then obviously the definitions also define a protected use ADU. So it must include at least one separate entrance, be not larger than 900 square feet, or 1/2 of the gross floor area of the principal dwelling, whichever is smaller. And then also is subject to additional restrictions by the municipality so long as they are reasonable. And the ADU regulations gets a little bit further into what is reasonable and what is not. And then we also have this graphic that we like to showcase, and it just shows that ADUs can take many different forms. So they can be, for example, a garage conversion, they can be internal, they can be attached, they can be detached. So it's not always just your typical detached ADU, which is often what is showcased. It can take many different forms so long as they meet the definition of a protected use ADU in our regulations. Dimensional standards. So the regulations do allow for municipalities to reasonably regulate dimensional standards. The caveat is our regulations describe that dimensional standards cannot be, at the local level, cannot be more restrictive than either for a single family home, the type of principal dwelling on the lot, or an accessory structure, whichever is more permissive for each of these standards. So for example, if you have a single family home on a lot and the property owner wants to develop a protected use ADU, the dimensional standards that are applied to that protected use ADU cannot be more restrictive than either a single family home or an accessory structure. If the principal dwelling is, for example, a triple decker, you would also add the dimensional standards in your zoning table for that type of principal dwelling to that calculation. And so this is something that we talk through with building officials a lot, but it's very clearly laid out in our regulations. Pre-existing ADUs. So if a pre-existing ADU meets the standard of a protected use ADU, and by standard, I mean, doesn't meet the definition in our regulations, any prior conditions that would be deemed either unreasonable or prohibited in the regulations and statute may not be continued. So for example, if a pre-existing ADU is under 900 square feet or 1/2 of the gross floor area of the principal dwelling, it meets the definition of a protected use ADU. This means, for example, if there's a pre-existing owner occupancy requirement and it was permitted under a prior ADU bylaw in that town, that could not be continued, and that property owner is entitled to the rights of a protected use ADU. Address assignment. We want to highlight address standards published by MassGIS for ADUs. It's important that cities and towns take a look at these address standards and abide by them and make sure the addressing of new ADUs are consistent with this. It's especially important, for example, for fire and safety and emergency worker reasons. We want to have it be clear when there's, for example, some sort of emergency on the property that there is another dwelling unit there, because especially if it's not an attached ADU, it's not always obvious. So if the addressing standards are followed, then the emergency workers will know that there's another dwelling unit on that property in case of an emergency. Also wanted to highlight, I had alluded to this, but the regulations do lay out both prohibited and unreasonable regulations at the municipal level that either must be prohibited from protected use ADUs or could be deemed unreasonable. So it's a little bit self-explanatory, but prohibited requirements cannot be applied to protected use ADU. This includes owner occupancy requirements, which is defined in the regulations, certain parking restrictions. So if the ADU is within 1/2 a mile of a transit station, there cannot be parking required. Use and occupancy restrictions and unit and density caps. And you also can't require a certain type of ADU. So you can't require just, for example, just internal ADUs or just detached ADUs at the local level. Unreasonable regulations is a little bit more complicated. So it gets back to what I was talking about with now that ADU regulations are protected under the Dover Amendment or Section 3 of Chapter 40A. So because they have these protections, when HLC was drafting the regulations, we provided a legal framework for cities and towns to apply to local requirements when they're trying to figure out whether or not a particular requirement is reasonable or unreasonable. So they would use this legal test, which is laid out at 760 CMR 71, Section 3. And basically, you follow the test to determine whether or not a certain requirement meets the standard of a legitimate municipal interest, or it would be deemed unreasonable. And then for certain land use restrictions, for example, dimensional standards, environmental regulation, impact fees, etc., we also carve out specific parts of that legal test to consider as the city or town is walking through that. So it's a little complicated. Encourage folks to view the regulations themselves and look through that portion of the regulations. So HLC has been pretty regularly updating frequently asked questions on our mass.gov/ADU page, and we have been working with our partners at the Attorney General's office as well on these answers. And a lot of these questions have come from cities, towns, and building officials, as well as property owners. And so we welcome questions in our inbox because it helps inform our FAQs in the future. But these are a non-exhaustive list of the FAQs that we have on our website. I think we have around 40 now. So just a quick snapshot. So we separate out our FAQs into these 4 buckets, but some ones that come up a lot, we get asked about short-term rentals. So cities or towns can themselves determine whether or not they want to prohibit protected use ADUs from being short-term rentals. When I say short-term rentals, I mean Airbnb, Vrbo, any other type of company that falls under that definition in Chapter 64G. And then we get questions a lot on minimum lot size requirements. Those cannot be applied to protected use ADUs. We have a great FAQ on manufactured housing. The short answer is that if a protected use ADU meets the definition of modular dwelling unit in our regulations, then if it is also manufactured housing, then it can be a protected use ADU. And then I'm just scanning through these if there's any more I want to highlight. Yeah, we get a lot of questions on ADUs and HOAs. The short answer is that HOAs are not addressed by the regulations or the statute, which really applies to municipal regulation of protected use ADUs. So if an HOA does prohibit a protected use ADU, this may be allowable. I encourage you to check out the full FAQ language. And then we have some more information for property owners on how to get an ADU permit and property specific questions. So as a general rule of thumb, we advise property owners to speak to their city or town or building official as a great first step if they're interested in ADU development. As you know, there is this ADU law and regulations, but there's still differing rules and bylaws at the municipal level, and property owners, that's the first place to go because there are local rules that will differ from municipality to municipality. Also wanted to highlight some other resources. So I did a really brief overview of the new law and regulation. But we have a webinar that really walks through the very specifics of the statute and each part of the regulation piece by piece. We talk more about that legal test that I was referencing. So if you want to learn more, please check out that recording on YouTube. We also have a model zoning resource for municipalities who are updating their zoning to be in alignment with the new ADU law. So we encourage you to check that out, that YouTube, if there are any planners on the call. And then we also have a webinar that we produced with Massachusetts DEP on Title V and septic capacity coming very soon. So please keep an eye out for that on our website. So we have some really cool new initiatives launching at the state or just launched at the state level when it comes to ADUs. We had a great announcement with the governor and lieutenant governor last week out in Lexington, where she highlighted what we're thinking of as a multi-pronged strategy. So following the regulations and law going into full effect in February, and then rounding out the year with this next big push for ADU development, in addition to this policy change. One of those parts of the strategy is the ADU design challenge. And so HLC, along with some really great partners that we were a part of a broader steering committee, which MHP was included in that, put together submission guidelines for architects to apply for prizes with ADU conceptual designs. And so the goal of this challenge is to not only spread awareness about ADUs and to inspire ADU development, but also to lower design costs. So the end outcome will be ready to use ADU floor plans and elevations available to the public on HLC's website in a design guidebook that property owners can download and then take to a contractor, a designer, and make it site specific. And hopefully this will drive down costs a little bit and also inspire development. That submission period is open. It opened up on Monday, and it's running through February 27th. And then we'll have a judging period, and then we'll announce winners in April 2026. We want to really thank our generous sponsors. So that is the Eastern Bank, the Boston Foundation, MHP, and Massachusetts AIA for not only helping us launch this competition, but also sponsor it. First place will be awarded $20,000, and you can see second and third place are also awarded a very generous amount. And then we will also award category awards for exceptional compact ADUs. These are smaller ADUs. Standard ADUs, these are up to 900 square feet. Exceptional, sustainable, accessible, and innovative construction methods. And what that means is essentially modular or any type of innovative construction. And the guidelines get into more specifics on that. So if you're interested, please check that out. I also have the link to the design challenge page at the end of this presentation. Also wanted to highlight very briefly the ADU incentives program. Elliot will be speaking a little bit more about this when I hand it over, but wanted to just do a brief highlight. So basically, as part of the governor's fiscal capital investment plan, over the course of 2 fiscal years, $10 million over 2 years, so $5 million for fiscal year 2026, and $5 million for fiscal year 2027. HLC has contracted with MHP to develop this incentive program, and it will promote ADU construction and support homeowners through the pre-development process and technical assistance as a whole. I want to stress that this program is still in development, so specifics are not available at this time. However, we do have an interest form available at our website for any property owners, developers, or any relevant stakeholders to submit interest. Also wanted to highlight that Mass Housing will also be launching an ADU loan program as part as this $20 million bucket for mission-oriented homeownership activities. So this will be a part of that. I will also be launching the new year. Don't have additional information to share on that, but I do encourage folks to continue to check back at Mass Housing's website. Finally, we wanted to share our data collection progress. So HLC every 6 months sends out and will be sending out a survey to building officials across the street to track ADU process or progress, not process. And so as you can see by this map, we received applications from a majority, or we received data from a majority of the state. And so from that data, we know that over 500 ADUs were approved in the first half of the year based on survey responses. We are really encouraged by this as the law was passed, or the law went into full effect in February. And so this is an amazing start for the first half of the year. And we're excited to get results for the second half of the year. And we're just going to try to continue to build momentum through these other great initiatives, the Design Challenge, the incentives program, and we're really excited about the Mass Housing Loan Program to help to continue to push and unlock more ADUs across the state and get the information out to property owners on how they can investigate whether this is feasible on their property, what they need to know to develop an ADU, what are the potential challenges on their specific property and that they should be aware of before they get into this process. As well as we know that new construction housing is and continues to be very expensive across the board. So these financing programs are going to hopefully help relieve some of that barriers and help us continue to unlock ADUs. So with that, this is my email address, claire.morehouse@mass.gov. You're welcome to email me any questions that you have in addition to asking questions right now. And then these are the two links to our general page as well as the design challenge page if you're interested.
Great. Thank you so much, Claire.
I think I went a little over. Sorry, Shelley.
No, that was fantastic. So we do have some questions, and I'm going to ask my colleague Ranieri to read the initial ones, and then we have more coming in.
So the first question that we have is, how are we defining transit stations, particularly if we have a dial-a-ride program that will pick up anywhere?
Yeah, so a transit station is defined in the regulations as either a subway station, commuter rail station, ferry terminal, or a bus station. And then it's further defined. Each of those are further defined in the regulations. So I encourage you to check out those full definitions. They're a little long, so I'm not going to read them aloud. I just also placed the link to the regulations in the chat.
And next question, is there clarity on the impact of ADUs relative to the SHI specifically? Will they be included in the total unit count for communities? If so, has HLC studied or considered the impact on communities across the Commonwealth?
We haven't, it's very new, so we haven't done any studies on the impact across the Commonwealth. We do foresee these being counted towards the denominator for the SHI.
Understanding that owner occupancy cannot be required for obtaining an ADU permit, could an affordable housing trust make that, or for example, no student housing, a stipulation for obtaining grants or loan funding offered by the trust?
I'm going to say maybe to that. So basically so when I say owner occupancy cannot be required, that is at the city or town level. So a municipality may not impose any prohibited regulation or requirement on a protected use ADU. Whether a bank or lending institution, for example, could, for example, require owner occupancy, we do not regulate that. That is outside the scope of our law. So whether an affordable housing trust could, I'm going to be silent on yes or no, but I believe they could. But you may want to follow up with me. I'll put my email in the chat.
Wayland's Housing Partnership has a keen interest in tax relief for ADUs, while safe harbor implications have been raised by the planning board as a significant concern. Oh, wait, that's not a question. My bad. So the actual question is, has the state decided to count these toward the SHI or count it toward the total housing inventory?
I think I answered part of that question. We also have an FAQ on whether or not ADUs count on the SHI, or count as a unit on the SHI. It's a nuanced answer, and so I'm going to pop that in the chat.
Great. I think that that's the questions right now. And so we are,
There's
if you
actually
do have it,
another one, Shelley.
I'm sorry.
There's actually another one.
Here, I'll just reply with our FAQ on this on manufactured housing.
Okay.
Okay. You see another ADU question, Renee?
Yes. So let's see. We haven't gotten to the tax exemption portion of the conversation today yet, but could the tax exemption be offered only to affordable ADUs?
Yep. So we'll talk about that later when we're talking about the tax exemption. So I think that that is it at this point for questions for Claire. But if you do have others, pop them in the chat. She's going to stick around for a little bit, and we're going to transition to Elliot Schmidl, who is the director of homeownership at MHP. And he's going to talk a bit more about the incentive program, ADU incentive program that MHP is working on. Elliot?
All right. Hi, everybody. Thanks, Shelley. And thanks, Claire, for leading off. My name is Elliot Schmidl. I'm the Director of Homeownership here at MHP. Oversee a lot of our homeownership programming here and work closely with Shelley and the community assistance team on a number of different issues, including a new one on our plate here, which we're here to talk about today, accessory dwelling units. As this effort landed on our lap here at MHP, we're very excited to learn more about what the new law means for Massachusetts. But we're also interested in learning what it's meant, similar efforts have meant in other places, other localities, other states. So we've been talking to more and more folks in the industry over the last several weeks and months, builders, administrators of other state and local programs, private lenders who offer financing for ADUs, nonprofit organizations who look to support this kind of work. And we're really trying to understand as much as possible about, currently and in the past, how property owners have navigated, more lenient bylaws like our new bylaw to construct ADUs. Now knowing that in the first half of the year, over 500 ADU permits were approved, likely that many or somewhere close in the second half of the year. That's a lot of data points to sort of go on. And we want to understand, it's still a very new market. So hopefully that's just the tip of the iceberg. We want to unlock many, many more. But we're really focused on identifying barriers, gaps, and things that will generally hinder progress along the way as somebody moves from the idea of they want to build an ADU to actually getting a permit approved and breaking ground and constructing this thing. So with all that in mind, the program I'm here to talk about today, we are really focused on using this money in as smart a way as we possibly can, find the best uses for the funds so that we can be precise with the application of them to help homeowners and property owners get past those barriers, fill in those gaps, and hopefully unlock more ADUs. So we've been working really closely with Claire and others at HLC in support of the administration's priority to build more housing, and ADUs being a big part of that. So we're happy to be working on the ADU incentive program. And I will talk about that program in a little bit more detail. It's going to revolve around three main parts. The first is outreach, awareness, and education. So information and consumer education. The second piece is going to be technical assistance for property owners who want to move forward with an ADU. And the third will be financial assistance. How can we wrap some of these funds into a financial assistance package, which will help close those gaps, eliminate those gaps for folks. So I'll talk about each of those three and then close out, sort of give you a hint towards timeline and things like that, and some other considerations that we've been thinking about. On the outreach, awareness, and education piece, a lot of that work is going to be relationship building, network building with industry partners and stakeholders. A lot of phone calls, a lot of meetings. We're going to put together webinars. This is probably not the This won't be the last time you hear from us. We're going to look to convene property owners, residential construction providers, municipal officials and leaders, nonprofits again, because this is such a new market, and there are a lot of things to learn. And as we and as others learn those things, we want to connect the dots as best we can. So we're going to play the role, of convener along with HLC, and really try to create this market. We'll create collateral material for property owners to help them navigate the complex process of planning, permitting, building, and financing their ADU. We'll have website content on mhp.net where you can come learn about the program and what it offers and how to work through it. And there will probably be a consumer guidebook as well, that we will publish. It'll contain valuable information and a roadmap of sorts, to help somebody again go from that idea phase. What are the steps, step by step? How do I build an ADU on my property, and incorporate programs like this and like the mass housing financing program that Claire mentioned, and possibly other programs that come on down the line. Maybe some municipal programs are going to be wrapped into that. And then we'll do marketing and outreach. We want to build broad awareness of the supports that are here to help homeowners and property owners. We'll likely contract with a marketing firm or an advertising firm to help spread the word and build awareness. We will do a lot of communicating and partnering with municipalities, with nonprofits, and with lenders. It's likely that landlord education will play a role here. If folks are building an ADU for the purposes of renting that ADU, they're becoming a landlord, and there's a lot of legalities to navigate there. We want to inform folks properly. And so come the new year, this sort of starts in earnest, and we'll start reaching out more proactively and formally to a lot of these different constituencies, to share more details of the program as they become available. So in terms of those details, I'll move into the technical assistance piece a little bit. Right now, we're focused on what we're calling phase one, or an initial phase of the program, centered around the idea of providing feasibility studies to more and more interested property owners. A feasibility study is basically a review of an analysis of the site and the lot, and is really the first glimpse that a builder or a feasibility study provider would shed light on onto whether or not this ADU can be built for the homeowner. It's an analysis of the lot, again, site access, the use case. What are you looking to use this ADU for? Utilities, wastewater, permitting requirements, and then ultimately cost. That's probably the biggest barrier. And it's not just, oh, it costs a lot. It's that there's a huge misconception among the public about what an ADU typically costs to build. And so what we want to do is demystify that a little bit, be transparent and upfront, and hopefully find ways to deliver to interested property owners as quickly and as upfront as possible what their ADU design dream might cost. So a lot of those things they're barriers. And if we can get the information to the homeowner about those barriers, again, as far upstream as possible, we think that this will lead to better results down the road. There's currently companies that are in this market. They're mostly builders. Some are general contractors. Some are design build firms. But they are providing feasibility studies. Some cost money, some are free. But the products, while similar, are a little bit different. So we'd like to help expand this industry, support this industry, and help standardize it to a certain degree so that folks are getting the same, from property owner to property owner, getting the same value from that feasibility study. So this work's going to involve MHP procuring and contracting with providers who offer these studies. I mentioned kind of who they are, but I think that there's probably more out there that we don't know who they are. And that's why we want to cast a wide net and issue a broad procurement to try to partner with as many feasibility study providers as we possibly can. In conversations with several folks who are in this industry right now, they've relayed that about 20% of property owners who receive a feasibility study end up moving towards a build. And so if we have a goal of number of ADUs we need to get to, we know we need a much bigger number of feasibility studies to work from, because there's all kinds of considerations that go into it, both site level considerations as well as personal issues that financing issues, things like that. So that's what we are looking to do with phase one. The general timing of that is probably going to be April or so. We're going to be working like mad over the next several months to put that procurement out and partner with these entities and put the framework of this program together. But we hope to be able to offer it come spring. As we look ahead at the financial assistance, that's the third piece. A little bit of this is we don't know what we don't know yet. And we hope to use phase one to gather as much information insight as we can to better identify what those barriers ultimately are. So it's likely that this future financial assistance phase will include some assistance for pre-development costs, the things that need to be done before ground is even broken or a permit is approved. But they could also have to do with construction gap financing and things like that to help make the math work. It's interesting also in talking to a lot of folks who built these and builders who built them. Most of these applications involve a family situation, building ADU for aging parents, or the parents are moving into the ADU and the adult son and wife and children are moving into the main house. And so understanding sort of how they're being funded. A lot of them are being funded with proceeds of a sale of one home or a cash out refi. But I think that's the more we learn about how they're being funded and financed, the better we're going to be equipped to fill in those cost gaps. So we think that collecting and reviewing hundreds or even thousands of feasibility studies is going to give us good data and information to go on. Couple other specific sort of notes or insights that I'll share. On this first initial phase, we plan to, again, cast a very wide net. I don't think that we'll have income or asset limits. We want to really take in as many feasibility studies as we can. Future phases of the program, when we get to actual financial assistance and like awards to home buyers, I think we'll have a tighter box of eligibility requirements that folks would need to qualify within. Claire mentioned also the different ADU types, right? We're going to be inclusive here, understanding that when most people think of an ADU, they think of the detached backyard cottage type. But I think that largely this program will be open to basements, attics, garage conversions, whatever kind of ADU that site necessitates. Understanding too that like we've got rural, suburban, urban areas, and different ADU types are going to make more sense in those three different areas. So that's the core of what I wanted to share today. I'm sure there's I think I've seen maybe a few questions pop up in the chat. Understand that there's limited detail available because we are literally building this as we speak, but we plan to start communicating outward. Claire mentioned that the contact form is set up on HLC's website. We are going to be working to deliver programmatic updates to folks who submit their email address for more information as we develop the program, as we get closer to launch, and look forward to hearing from us, for upcoming webinars and information sessions as we also get closer to program launch. So with that, I'll love to open up to questions and see if we can be of help.
Yeah, thank you, Elliot. So there's one comment that perhaps all ADUs should have some sort of tax relief, but I think that because property tax is on the local level, that the state's not going to get into that it's going to be a local decision. There is a question of, given MHP and MHP's mission and our focus on affordable housing, if you would just talk a little bit about why MHP is looking to potentially invest in market rate ADUs.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And that was a question we kicked around quite a bit when we were pitched this project as a whole. Our focus is largely on LMI and affordable housing. And we understand that we're at a point where this is so new to the state of Massachusetts that we really want to learn. We're almost looking at this as a learning exercise to better understand what the different use cases and applications are, what the different who's also looking to develop these. We've talked with other partners elsewhere who've administered programs that are similar, and got a lot of constructive feedback about how to structure eligibility criteria, income limits, and then restrictions as it comes to the ADU itself. I'll be honest, one of my personal first thoughts was, oh, if we can create some sort of stipulation where you have to rent to an LMI household for a certain number of years, right? But we may be too early, and there could be future iterations of the program or of public assistance portion of the program that includes something like that, but not to start. I think we want to start with the top of the funnel and then sort of, as time goes on, as we learn more, hopefully get to a place where there may be a later focus on subsidizing to a certain degree the creation of affordable ADUs or rent restricted ADUs or something like that. But we're not there at this point.
Thanks. So there is a little bit more about if there's affordability with ADUs, and so it is, just to put out there, and Claire, interrupt me if I am incorrect, but so the community can't require that an ADU is affordable, but there could potentially be incentives to encourage it or to invest in a unit that's affordable. But the community just needs to consider, how do you then manage that to make sure that the units actually are affordable? And so how are you structuring income qualifying? And to expect an individual homeowner to be responsible for that might be a lot to ask, but is there a way that the municipality can support that if that's really an interest locally? I think that, and then Claire, so one of the questions was about the feasibility studies. So Claire put in the link at HLC's website if you're interested in submitting for that. We're
Okay.
finding in our town that the energy code compliance, will this be considered? Okay, so one question is, we're finding in our town that the energy code compliance requirements is increasing the cost of ADUs by as much as possibly 25 to 30%. Will this be, I just lost it because of other, okay. Will
I
this
see it.
be considered as part of the feasibility? Will this be considered as part in the feasibility studies?
Yeah, that's a good comment. It sounds town specific, but in my talking with several of the builders, part of their feasibility study typically involves contact and communication with the town itself to better understand what specifics that town may have in place as far as permitting goes or cost or things like this. I think there's a whole bunch of local consideration that goes into this feasibility study, because it's not certainly not cookie cutter as we deal with 351 municipalities across the state.
And I'll just jump in really quick because we had a question about whether or not the design challenge will have accessible designs. We are soliciting categories specifically for what we want to encourage designs for and what we know are requirements across Massachusetts. So with accessibility, for example, we know a lot of people looking to develop ADUs are looking to age in place or are hoping one day to maybe have rental income and then one day age in place. So we're definitely trying to solicit designs that encourage universal design principles and accessible principles woven into these designs. On the sustainability portion, we are requiring that all designs meet a minimum threshold that would meet the stretch code standards apart from getting a certified HERS rating, which is to be in full compliance. But the idea is that eventually these designs would at least slightly lower that pre-development cost on the sustainability end. So we are very aware at the state level that this is increasing costs to development, and we're taking that into considerations with all the programs that we're developing.
That's great. So, two questions for either speaker. Who is the lead on coming up with a second lien financing? And will this initiative connect with the MAPC modular task force?
So the second lien financing question, it does fall into the parameters of the ADU incentive program. That would be part of that phase 2 financial assistance piece, gap financing. If somebody were to be able to finance the majority of the needed costs with a private loan from a lender. Something we're exploring would be a second lien, a second mortgage to help close that gap. Certainly something that's squarely on the table, but not being deployed, at the initial outset of the program. I did want to mention one other thing too, as it relates a little bit to the energy question. Most people, when they think of this ADU, are going right to the design, maybe the site, and the build. But there are things like energy costs, insurance considerations, tax implications as well. Obviously, part of why we're here to talk about that. Estate planning. As I mentioned, so many of these have been family scenarios, and estate planning becomes a big consideration because, who's moving into the unit, who retains ownership of the main house or the AD, there's a lot of that. And so several of the builders I've talked to have relationships with estate planning attorneys who they bring in to help counsel and educate these property owners on the options that they have to split ownership, share ownership, things like that. And we'll likely, as we develop resources and materials and look to educate more people, include information on all those sorts of things.
That's great. So thanks so much to Claire and Elliot, and they will stick around for just a few more minutes. If you have other questions you'd like to put in the chat, we are asking for any of the participants, if your community is working on ADUs, working to support ADUs, if you would be willing to just put in your community and what you're doing, just so that we're familiar with kind of what's going on around the state. That would be helpful for us. But at this point, we thank Claire and Elliot for being here, and we're going to shift gears to talk about the property, having the most computer issues today. I'm so sorry. We're going to shift to the property tax exemption for affordable housing. And I just want to say it from the beginning that we did invite the Division of Local Services to be with us today. They were not able to make this time, and we still wanted to couple this topic with ADUs. So we're not going to be able to get really technical about the property tax exemption for affordable housing. It is organized, it's under General Law, Chapter 59, Section 50. You can read that. And the Division of Local Services put out an IGR last year that you can, the link is, Egremont put it on their website, so I just have the link here, and I think that we'll put it in our chat in just a minute for you to access, to read through their guidance on implementing the tax exemption if your community is doing that, looking to do that. Just some basics about it. It was created by Section 3 of an Act to Improve the Commonwealth's Competitiveness, Affordability, and Equity, which was signed into law in 2023. The tax exemption is accepted by your local legislative body. It applies to residential units that are rented to income qualified persons at an affordable rate, year-round on an annual basis. The exemption can be no more than the tax due on the parcel or the unit. So if it's a 3-family house and one unit is being rented affordably, then the exemption can be no more than 1/3 of the tax bill for the house. And then the income ceiling is set at 200% AMI as the max in the guidance that the DLS has put out. And again, there is a document that you can access if you haven't seen it yet. So that's just some very basic. And then we've invited the town of Egremont in the Berkshires to come today and to share the program that they have in place, how they've structured it, and how it's working. So I am inviting Doug and Mary to share.
Thanks, Shelley. I'll get us started. I'm Doug Mishkin with Mary Brazy. We're both members of the Egremont Housing Trust. Mary's also a member of the Select Board and our office administrator. I'm going to talk quickly about how and why we adopted the exemption program. Mary will talk about how we've implemented it. Let me just give you a little bit of context. It may be helpful for your own town. We did three things simultaneously at our October 2024 town meeting. We got the town to approve a workforce housing project on town-owned land. Let me quickly drop a footnote for those of you from small towns or rural areas. We'd be really happy to talk to you about that project because it's an innovative project that should be replicated across the state. But we got the town to approve a workforce housing project. We got the town to adopt the Community Preservation Act. And the third thing we did was to adopt the affordable housing property tax exemption. And that combination was powerful in advocating for the property tax exemption, because with the workforce housing project, we were able to show the town how expensive it is to build a single unit of the kind of housing we were talking about. Depending upon how you slice it, it's $300,000, $400,000 per unit. Then, with the Community Preservation Act on the warrant, we were able to say, look, some people will pay more money in order to fund affordable housing going forward. So the third piece of this was, with the property tax exemption, some people can pay less. And the other virtues of the exemption was it was a way to create some affordable rental housing, and it would cost the town pennies to do it in terms of the tax revenue that it was going to forego. Now, part of this is, yes, we are trying to disincentivize people who operate short-term rentals. We want to incentivize them to move toward long-term rentals. A couple of other things we had to decide along the way. The Housing Trust discussed and then decided that the exemption would not be for 100% of the taxes that would otherwise be allocable to the long-term rented unit. We went for an 80% exemption on the theory that everybody should still pay something, but 80% was a significant exemption. We did opt to use the cap of 200% AMI on who's an income qualified tenant. We did that because we are focused on trying to serve a workforce in Egremont and the surrounding community for which there is very little housing available. So we're trying to serve that workforce. We wanted maximum flexibility in this program, so we went for 200% AMI. And one of the watchwords of our faith is that the AMI is just too low to begin with. When we considered the program, we had heard that only one or two other towns had done it, to which we said, great, who cares? And that's the basics, the Reader's Digest version of how and why we got it adopted. Mary's going to talk a bit about how we've implemented it.
Hello, everyone. I'm Mary Brazy from the town of Egremont. After the town meeting vote, and to answer a question, someone did want to know who the legislative body was. That is the town meeting. After town meeting, we decided the best way to get word out was to send a letter out in our tax bills. And that did generate probably a half a dozen questions or so. We put together the application that the Commonwealth Department of Revenue actually had and established our rules and got, in the end, 7 applications, 6 of which were approved. 1 was denied because the rent did not qualify. To give you some idea, Egremont has 901 taxable properties. 6 isn't a whole lot. The cost effect to our taxpayers was about $9,800. So we weren't talking about a lot of money. And we've now got a couple of more people that are looking at this exemption for the following year. We decided to do an 80%, and the IGR from the Department of Revenue gives you a fairly clear idea on how to calculate this. You take the square footage, come up with, say, one home. It was a 3,300 square foot house. They rented 750 square feet. You come up with the percentage of the square footage. You have to then come up with your percentage of the value that the assessors have given the property and simply take 80% of that taxes and give them the exemption. Um, One of the questions I see in the chat is how does the exemption work for rental properties? Does the landlord qualify? We did not implement a owner occupied restriction on it. So yes, whether you're living there, you're the landlord, you're not here in Egremont, you can apply, your tenant and you can apply for this exemption. Do you verify the amount of tax break based on the level of affordability? Would you give a bigger? Um, no. I think we decided that it's 80% of the taxes, and whether your AMI is lower, we're not going to give you an 80% tax exemption is quite an attractive exemption already. It's an
Mary,
annual I'm
do
sorry.
you have other things that you're wanting to share and you don't have to worry about the questions just yet? Go ahead and talk through what you were wanting to.
I don't think I do, actually.
Okay, so I will help ask you the questions so you don't have to just be reading on your own, but what is the time period for the exemption?
It's an annual exemption with an annual application.
And how do you do income qualifying? How do you manage that piece?
We required the tax records with redacted information from the tenants. And we also
Okay.
requested a copy of the lease to prove that there was some agreement on the rent.
And so are those, is that something that the landlord, the owner has to submit to the town?
Yes, the owner submits the application with the tax records and the lease agreement.
Hmm. So would the tax break be applied proportionally across mixed income developments? Is it open to larger developments or is it smaller? How do you do that with larger developments?
S- So we don't have large developments. We're a very rural town. Most of our properties are single family, single dwellings. We have a very small handful, I'm two, I think, that you might consider apartment buildings that have 4 units. And they would, those the units that I'm thinking of are actually fully rented. And they would just have to say, prove to us that 50% of them were affordably rented and they would get 80% of 50% of their tax bill as an exemption. So we did not make a
And
distinction between single family or development.
do you require, did you say that you require, so you proof of income, but do you also do proof of lease?
Yes,
Okay. And so you had said that you don't, there isn't a monitoring, there is not a monitoring agent in this, in your situation. It's that the landlord, the owner who's seeking the exemption has to submit the paperwork.
correct.
Yep. Um, Is there any, so the question around qualifying a tenant, it's based on what the owner seeking the exemption submits. So it's not the town
Correct.
doing any qualifying of tenants. Is it open? And then there's no process for where you only have a certain number of exemptions that you're willing to allow each year, and therefore there's some sort of lottery. It's not like that. Is it first come, first serve, or do you have a cap on how many you would accept?
We didn't cap it because we really felt that we were only going to get probably a half a dozen
Hmm.
applications, which proved to be accurate.
Okay. Has there been conversation of it if it gets beyond that?
There has not been conversation. I suppose we'll cross that bridge if we need to.
Hmm. Okay. Um, so some of these questions we've already kind of answered. How do you, So, how do communities that have significant amounts of affordable housing avoid losing tax revenue on those existing properties? Yeah, so this is a question that communities will have to ask. And MHP has had some conversations with other communities considering the tax exemption. And so, in some communities, there is a concern that there would be high demand for this and the loss of revenue could be great. And so communities are just having to do some analysis on this and think about how they might implement this to offer some relief, but to not have it be too much for the community. If there are other communities that are thinking about this, we'd love to get some of your feedback in the chat of how you're thinking this through. Um, to manage the tax break. Does Egremont have an affordable housing trust to manage the tax break? So again, because you have at this point a half a dozen, then it's not a financial concern for the town at this point.
It has not been, no.
Has not been. There is just tons of questions here. I'm going to let people raise their hand if they would like to have a bit of a conversation. Eric, go ahead.
Thanks very much. So I've been looking at this program for quite some time, and initially I was suggesting that the town of Bedford consider implementing a program that's based off of the same calculations, but not offering a specific tax exemption, but rather collecting the information from property owners using a certain pre-approved amount of funding from the housing trust. However, it was we're under the understanding that we will not be able to use CPA funds to run a program like that. And if that's the case, I was hoping that people might be able to explore or maybe debunk that premise. And also, I had posted a link in the chat to a document that I had found previously that answered some legal questions about various topics, but page 25 covers the specific questions that communities might have about placing a cap on their tax if they adopt a tax exemption statute locally, because it seems like it does expose a community that has a significant number of affordable units to losing, the tax revenue on those units to begin with. So if you already have a large amount of affordable units, it might not be worth offering the tax exemption to just get a couple of new units created because you suddenly lose a lot of revenue on your existing units. Thanks. I'm trying to find ideas on how to still implement something like this without that type of tax revenue exposure.
So I think that's a tough one for your larger towns. It was fairly easy for us because we knew we were small. We knew we were going to get very few, and we knew that there wouldn't be a significant tax impact.
And we were able at the same time to contrast the very limited tax impact with the now concrete cost of building new units because we were doing the new construction project at the same time.
Yeah. So, Rich.
Yeah, I don't know whether Harwich is on this call, but we just talked to them and they actually, their assessor's office will even look at the income tax returns uh, from the tenant if they don't want to submit it through the landlord. And they put a cap of 30, and so far they've
No, I
done
have it
9
in my
since
office.
July 1st. So
It's
if
right
they're
up.
here, they might want to comment more.
Thank you. Howard, let us know if you're here. So there is a question for you if renters of ADUs can be I'm sorry, that's a different question. Can for your program, can the tenant be a family member? Can be related and still get a
Yes.
tax break?
Yes, we agreed quite strongly, actually, not to put a restriction such as that on our program.
Okay.
And back to the question about assessors and their burden, by the way. In Egremont's case, the Egremont Municipal Housing Trust agreed to take on the burden and to make a recommendation to the assessors, so that all they simply had to do was put together a list and notify the tax collector.
Fantastic. Katie.
Sorry, I probably should be saving for the attendees. I didn't hear the answer to, someone had raised a very good question about fair housing concerns and eligibility for the SHI. What is the process for doing lottery and monitoring, or are you not concerned that these are on the subsidized housing inventory?
Mary, I'm happy to take a swing at that. Katie, I think there are two questions there. One is about lottery. There's no lottery because we're not doling these out. We have no limit on who can apply and get accepted. So if you apply and you qualify, you're going to get the exemption unless we decide to change the program in the future.
I mean the occupant of the unit.
That's a matter for the owner of the unit.
Okay, and you don't know how that's being handled?
Correct.
Got it.
That's not our business.
No.
If the owner is engaged in a violation of fair housing, that's.
I guess what I'm saying is one of the town's goals to get these to count on the subsidized housing inventory?
That's the second question, and the answer is within the sanctity of this confidential conversation with 96 of you, as a practical matter, no. Because if we had to do this at 80% AMI, we would, we think, be unduly limiting the program. Our objective is create more housing for the workforce in this area. And our experience is that 80% would be too low. It would exclude too many of the kinds of workers that we are trying to provide housing for. So if the result is these units don't get counted on the subsidized housing inventory, our view is that's too bad. If the result of that is we remain vulnerable to some developer coming in and inflicting a hostile 40B on us, there's a little bit of a joke off the record in the Housing Trust, which is we should be so lucky that some developers would want to come in and build more housing.
No, you're music to my ears, what you're saying, because I feel like the SHI ends up being kind of sometimes the tail wagging the dog.
And for this and for many other issues that we deal with, the refrain is the AMI is just too low.
So we will get to the hands being held, but I do want to address a couple that are in the chat. One is bringing up, is the tax exemption paid for through CPA funds? And I just want to address that because I know it's not in Egremont, but I don't see that as an allowable use of CPA funds to pay for taxes, to cover taxes. And of course, they would need to be income qualified or income restricted and somehow anyway. So I don't see that as an eligible use of CPA funds, and it's not being used that way in Egremont. There is a question, has anyone constructed or remodeled a unit with this exemption in mind? So do you know of, were any of the units created with this in mind as an option, or were they already units that existed in Egremont?
To our knowledge, they were all pre-existing, and I'm not aware of any new constructions with this in mind.
There's a question asking if MHP can provide a list of communities that have done this. We're trying to learn more about which communities are moving on this path. We just know of a few. So if your community is considering it, we'd love for you to put that in the chat, whether you've already passed it at town meeting or city council, whether you're considering it. We'd love to know. I think in a few different ways with Egremont specifically, we have talked about the revenue loss. So it's that it hasn't been as significant. I think that Mary said it's been about a $9,800 impact on the town, that has been, it sounds like that's been able to be absorbed at this point. So it looks like that there hasn't been any shifting yet. And at this point, I will invite Jeffrey to ask your question.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Let me apologize first because I may have difficulty framing my question. I visited with a town on the North Shore that has an affordable housing trust, and they've had it going on 10 years. The discussions were great, and they were looking for programs somewhat like you've spoken of to get this thing moving, because over the course of 10 years, they've been able to amass about $1 million. And I asked them, I said, well, how many affordable housing projects do you have going? And he said, well, none yet. And I said, after 10 years, none. He says, I can't buy one house for $1 million. And that sort of struck me home that the way you're going after a protected group, income, low income. And I was thinking for the town of Nahant, what if we could do some program like yours for seniors, but using the Affordable Housing Trust and the town as two different legal entities, where the town could offer an exemption to, say, an elderly person who wants to stay in their home, but have the trust reimburse or make whole the town for the amount of the exemption, and then pass that on from the member of the senior group, sort of like a reverse mortgage. And I don't know whether I'm phrasing all of these pieces together, but I'm thinking of an affordable trust and the town as two separate entities, and working a relationship between the funds that reside in the trust to make whole the town for giving the exemption for the seniors who want to stay in their house. But instead of it being forever tax refund, you could put a lien on the property that you don't charge interest for. But when the house comes up for, the senior passes on, the town could take it, we would have a lien against the property. So somebody's going to make money on selling the property, and they could recap the money. And I don't know whether I phrased that properly or not. So I'll take my hand
Well,
down.
so there, yeah, Jeffrey, I'm happy to talk with you offline about senior property tax exemptions or senior exemptions, that they do exist. Different communities have that, but today we're really focusing on this property tax exemption specifically for affordable housing. So anyways, I'm happy to talk with you about a different kind of program for seniors at a different time. Keith.
Hi, just to mention, Town of Concord is studying this measure in part as a reaction to the select board using the residential property tax exemption and shifting the tax burden from owner occupied or from, I should say, lower valued owner occupied properties to all other residential properties. And there was the concern that rental properties don't qualify as property owner occupied. And so is there an impact on rental properties? I do think it would be helpful to have MHP and HLC and others try to pull together those communities that are trying to do this. Boston supposedly is on that list of ones exploring it as well, so that we can see what would it take to administer the program successfully. Many communities would want to require some monitoring of the eligibility of the tenant for at whatever income level. I know Provincetown and Nantucket have lease to locals programs where they're already monitoring those things for a financial reward for doing the right thing for a landlord. So thanks to MHP for bringing this issue up, and I hope there's more work done to figure it out.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to address the comment or the question in the chat of if a unit is deed restricted and on the subsidized housing inventory, does it automatically qualify? So for a program like this, the tax exemption, I think it's primarily targeting housing that's assessed at market rate, because a unit that is already deed restricted, it should be assessed according to the deed restriction. So it should be more affordable, but it would be a local decision about how to structure this specific program, but it wouldn't be automatic. It would be a local program, and you would set your own parameters. So, however, just to remind people that if something is deed restricted, it should be assessed at a lower value. With this program in Egremont, they're not deed restricted units. They are just being rented at an affordable rate or rented under 200% of the area median income to people earning less than 200% of the area median income. Any other questions that folks have or comments that you want to bring up, or if your community is considering this, if you want to share a question or concern or something that you're trying to figure out, we'd love to hear that. No, Katie.
Hi, so I'm representing the town of Southbridge. We're in southern Worcester County, and we're kind of coming from this conversation from a very different end. We have a lot of existing what you would call like market rate affordable housing, but we're seeing like in Worcester County, our town is a lot lower on AMI than what the average is for the county. So we're kind of trying to see what we can do to like protect what is like existing like owner occupied like triple decker housing versus some of what could be developed and be considered affordable housing would actually be out of reach for a lot of our residents and what their AMI is versus the county AMI. So we're coming at it from that end, and I don't know if like our answer is more like targeting a program like this toward owner occupancy or something like that, but that's where we're at.
Thank you for sharing. Appreciate that. Jake.
Hi, Jake Dewey. I'm a landlord in Barnstable and been pushing for a program similar to this for almost 10 years now. So thank you for bringing it forward. One of my questions, I have a lot of tenants who are maybe undocumented residents, and so they may not have a tax return, or if someone may say they don't want to provide it for other reasons or concerns. Is there a workaround that's been approved, or would that happen on a local level if there was an affidavit or something of that nature that could be shared to help make it qualify?
Mary, do you have any thoughts on that?
I don't. We, being on the other end of the state, don't really have the undocumented problem here. I would think that would have to be a question that the Department of Revenue might want to weigh in on.
So, Mary, would you think that local programs of Barnstable were working on this kind of tax exemption that the Barnstable would reach out to perhaps DLS to weigh in?
That would be where I would go.
Okay. Marina?
I can sort of add a little bit of insight there. So we looked into this a lot while I was with the city of Somerville. I'm now with the town of Franklin, but I'm speaking to Somerville experiences. So when we talked about, people might not want to provide this information or they might not have this information. I did talk to the state, and they said that, yeah, if your assessing department comes up with a form, that might be acceptable. So that is an open avenue. It wasn't sort of a concrete, like, yes, definitely, but there is a little bit of wiggle room because they do understand that maybe folks don't have this data or these forms. And so they're sort of open to the idea of accepting other documentation. What we found with Somerville is it would be a really big impact on our budget, on the town's budget. You would end up, the city would have had to have limited it so much that in order to try to mitigate that impact on the budget, that then it sort of becomes a sort of it doesn't have the impact that you're trying to achieve. It's not going to achieve the goals that we were looking for. So for us, saying, okay, let's target it to folks making 80% AMI, that's a huge number of folks or units in Somerville, and you can't cap it. You have to offer it to anybody who otherwise qualifies under 5950. So the fact that we couldn't sort of target it specifically to an area of the city or specifically to a size of building or something like that made it so that it wasn't really something that the city could feasibly use. So we looked at it from two different angles. So we looked at it as, could we use this as a development tool to try to spur development? And could we use it for these naturally occurring affordable housing that may not be deed restricted, but you've got maybe a long-term owner who's keeping the rents low. And I will say that for future development doesn't really work, or to try to spur development doesn't really work. For NOAA, I think you'd really just have to like make it a very discrete project so that you're not potentially having these ripple effects on the town budget.
Thank you. Is that what you raised your hands for that specifically, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I appreciate that insight. Eric, I see in the chat what you're wanting to bring to conclusion, but I'm just not comfortable doing that for DLS since they're not here. I mean, they really need to be answering the more technical questions about this. So I'm sorry. I don't think that we're going to come to a conclusion specifically on that, but I think that it would be a great thing to reach out to DLS about. Betty, would you like to ask a question or comment?
Yeah, I'm also for the town of Barnstable. Jake Dewey's one of our landlords. I'm on the town council here. And I was just listening to Raina when they did the work there to see the hit. I was wondering, why wasn't this program structured similar to the residential exemption where you can shift the tax? I mean, taking a hit of this size really makes it almost impossible for larger communities to take advantage of this program. Especially, we have multifamily apartment complexes of 300 units, and we've got several of those. So you're saying that we can't exempt those? We can't do caps? We can't tailor this? I find it almost, torpedoing the program if you can't exempt some of this, because no community would take this kind of tax hit. And Egremont, you're a lot smaller. I mean, we're almost 50,000 residents here, which
Right.
is
And
enormous. So I'm really kind of disheartened listening to this. And I wish the folks with the technical expertise were here, because we're looking at this, but we almost maybe won't even look at it based on what I've heard.
right.
Betty, have you read through the IGR yet?
No, I haven't.
Okay, so that's one step, and then Mary, why don't you jump in?
I just wanted to point out that we did an 80%. That was our choice. You could do a 5% exemption, which is a much lower hit to your taxes, and take it to town meeting and see what your voters decide to do. They may see what we're seeing here, that there's no place for the workforce to live, which means that you're not going to have workers. You're not going to get your lawns mowed, your driveways plowed. There's not going to be somebody waiting on you at the grocery store. It's that sort of an impact that we're trying to mitigate here, as well as the fact that we went from 13 short-term rentals during COVID to 86 in a town with 901 tax parcels. That was big. And it came with a multitude of problems.
Okay. But again, if this is applicable to 300 unit multifamily apartments, I don't know. I mean,
So I think that you should read the IGR, because I know that there's a community that's trying to think about how to work in that. They have large developments as well, and if there's a way around including every single development. So I think read the IGR first
Okay.
and then have some local conversations. And we'll go back and think about whether we try to schedule another one specifically around the department DLS being able to be with us to answer some questions.
That would be
Thank you.
super helpful. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Yep. So we are coming up on 1:30. I thank Doug and Mary so much for being here and sharing your program. I thank everyone who's been engaged and asking questions and sharing in the chat. I'm sorry that we weren't able to answer everything and we weren't able to answer technical questions, but we wanted to start the conversation. Let all of you know that we're thinking about this, that we're hearing more and more questions and interest in this. So we'll go back and think about how we might offer another one that can dig into some of the technical questions that you have. And thank you to all of you for being here. And thank you for my colleagues for assisting today and with all my technical difficulties. Have a great day.